billions, the tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars even, that's going to go to these industries will not go to executive bonuses or to more stock buybacks.
Well, we don't want that. In fact, some companies, as you know, did stock buybacks, and I was never happy with that. It's very hard to tell them not to, but I would tell them not to. I would say I don't like it for that reason. Some did, and it turned out that they could have waited a long time. It would have been much better off if they did.
You can make it a condition of the bill. You can say that none of this money can go for that.
I wouldn't mind making, I mean, you know, it takes many, many people in this case to tango. But as far as I'm concerned, that conditions like that would be okay with me. John?
Mr. President, if I could, a question for you and then a question for Dr. Hahn. You enabled, I guess is probably the best way to put it, the Defense Production Act yesterday, but you didn't pull the trigger on it.
No, because we hope we're not going to need that.
You're getting a lot of calls on Capitol Hill from the Democratic leadership to pull the trigger on it. Why? What's the rationale for not doing it?
First of all, governors are supposed to be doing a lot of this work, and they are doing a lot of this work. The federal government's not supposed to be out there buying vast amounts of items and then shipping. You know, we're not a shipping clerk. The governors are supposed to be, as with testing, the governors are supposed to be doing it. We'll help out, and we'll help out wherever we can, and we can buy in volume, and in some cases, great volume. With the masks, as an example, which were really a problem. We have helped out, and there are right now millions of masks being made. But this is really for the local governments, governors, and people within the state, depending on the way they divide it up. And they'll do that, and they're doing a very good job of it. Where you have a problem with ventilators, we're working very hard trying to find. Nobody in their wildest dreams would have ever thought that we need tens of thousands of ventilators. This is something that's very unique to this, to what happened.
Under what conditions would you put the Defense Production Act into action?
Well, if we were desperately in need of something, and we frankly will know about that very shortly. We want to be ahead of, we don't want to do it as it happens, but before it happens. We're going to know a lot over the next 2 or 3 days. We'll know a lot.
For Dr. President. Dr. Hahn, any idea when remdesivir will be available to the market? And are there any drugs in the pipeline that you believe could qualify for a treatment IND?
So with respect to the first question, I'm prohibited by law to disclose confidential commercial information. What I can tell you is we're working very closely with the company on this, and we'll have additional information. They will relatively soon. Yes, there are drugs in the pipeline. We're looking at everyone. Everyone on this dais gets calls every day, as do all of our people at the FDA, about potential therapeutic options. We are looking at every single one of them.
Okay. Mr. President, 2 questions for you. One on coronavirus, but just really quickly, are you confirming that Austin Tice is still alive?
No, I'm not, but we're trying to find that out. This has been going on for years. Many years they've been trying to find Austin Tice. He was in Syria, as you know. His mother is an incredible woman. And I'm doing it for him, but I'm doing it for his mother. His mother's an incredible woman who's desperate to find her son. And I'm not confirming alive, but if he is alive, we would like very much to get him back quickly.
Okay, and on coronavirus, speaking of shortages of supplies, the CDC has put out guidelines for hospitals that are dealing with a shortage of masks to use them beyond their shelf life, reuse them instead of getting new ones, and in a worst case scenario, use a bandana instead of a mask. How is that acceptable at all?
Well, I haven't seen that, but I will let Mike answer that question, Vice President.
I'm happy to, Mr. President. I can't emphasize enough the incredible progress that was made with the passage of the legislation last night. The President had me go to Minnesota and meet with 3M that manufactures these N95 masks.
Okay, we'll leave that press conference for now. Thank you for staying with us here on Al Jazeera. I'm Halima Hussein in our London Broadcast Centre. We've been listening to President Trump and the coronavirus task force there at the White House giving a daily briefing. President Trump, of course, referring to this as a medical war. And announcing that the FDA in the States is set to fast-track antiviral treatments for use against the coronavirus. Lots of talk there about an anti-malarial drug, which is set to receive FDA approval. Talking also about how the FDA chief thinks they're around 12 months from a vaccine. We also heard that the US testing capacity is increasing, but with that, the number of positive tests is also increasing. Let's get more now from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Kimberly, lots of interesting things coming out of that press conference. Talk us through the highlights, if you would.
Well, you identified the highlight already, and that is that the big announcement is the fast tracking of drugs, the removing of red tape in order to get some of these antivirals that could potentially help treat the most serious of cases when it comes to coronavirus, but up until now had a series of procedures that they needed to go through. Now with this announcement, there will be an acceleration of that process. Now, the U.S. president probably should have handed off some of this information in this announcement to some of the professionals behind him. So it was difficult for me to understand what the name of the second drug was that he was talking about. But first, he talked about hydrochloroquine, a malaria drug, and the other one was certainly hard to identify because the president at times seemed to be kind of mumbling a little bit. It was clearly an area that was not his area of expertise. So we're a little foggy in terms of what that second drug was, but the overarching message in all of this was a removal of red tape in order to try and help Americans with some of these therapies. Now, the other big headline in all of this was the fact that the U.S. president is meeting later on with the governors of the United States, the various 50 states, and this is to coordinate a FEMA response. The vice president there saying that FEMA will now be taking the lead in terms of a response, not giving a whole lot of detail on exactly what that means, only that the states will play a larger role. And then finally, I thought it was interesting to note that Dr. Birx there, one of the top public health officials, saying that, in fact, when it comes to 50% of the cases of coronavirus here in the United States, it's coming down to 3 hotspot states. She didn't list those as far as I could hear. I know New York and California probably on that list. Not quite sure what the other one is, but certainly this was sort of talking about when we're speaking of resources, where those resources may need to be prioritized in terms of allocation.
OK, Kimberly Halkett, that's our White House correspondent, joining us there from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed, Kimberly. More from Kimberly, of course, as our coverage progresses. Well, let's see if we can bring you up to date on what has been another very busy news day related to the coronavirus. As that virus continues its unrelenting spread through the world and countries move to isolate themselves from each other, the statistics make for very grim reading. Italy, which has recorded fewer than half the number of infections as China, is expected today to pass China's death toll of 3,249. Spain's numbers are rising rapidly too, more than 100 dead in the past day, while Iran's health minister said on average 1 person there dies from the virus every 10 minutes. Michel Barnier, the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator, has tested positive for COVID-19. The 69-year-old says he is doing well and is following the necessary instructions. The positive sign, though, comes from China, which has recorded its first day with no person-to-person infections. We begin our coverage with this report from Paul Brennan.
The head of the World Health Organization has called coronavirus the enemy of humanity. In this intensive care unit in the Italian city of Bergamo, it's easy to see why. This footage, filmed by the head doctor, gives just a glimpse of the life and death struggles taking place across Italy and across the world. All 80 beds here are occupied. It's a crowded, frantic, overwhelming place. The system is on the brink.
100% di saturazione.
100% saturation. Normally out of these 80 beds, 3 or 4 recover and can leave on a particular day. And normally we are then forced to bring in 3 or 4 others. So we have a very precarious and difficult balance.
Isolation is a cold, hard necessity. Family members cannot visit here. They cannot comfort or support. COVID-19 brings a solitary death.
This is
perhaps one of the saddest things, but we know that during epidemics, the only way to save those who are outside is to not allow contact. We try where possible to let them talk on their cell phones or video calls, but sometimes they die when they are still intubated, so the call cannot happen. We know that isolation is a very important sacrifice, but it is needed so that people outside will not get sick.
Temporary field hospitals try to relieve the pressure, but the epidemic is roaring through the population here and the doctors are struggling to keep up. The widespread shortage of medical supplies is having fatal consequences for the staff. In Codogno, a doctor who was forced to work without wearing gloves has now died of the virus. In Bergamo province alone, 110 of the 600 medical staff have fallen ill.
We are in full emergency with this coronavirus pandemic. Our health personnel, nurses and physicians are working round the clock, countless hours to fight this incredible situation. We do not know how long this pandemic will last.
Under current measures, Italy's 60 million people are only allowed to travel for work, medical reasons or emergencies. And most shops, except groceries and pharmacies, are supposed to remain closed until March 25th.
You see very little people around. We are following on TV, internet situation. But on the other hand, we try also not to be overwhelmed by information. It's a danger there.
Elsewhere, though, the restrictions have not been so strictly observed. And faced with no visible slowdown in the pace of infections, the lockdown is set to be tightened further and the deadline of it extended. This crisis has been compared to a war. And at the moment, the virus is winning. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's get more on this now from Al Jazeera's Niamh Barker. Niamh, the death toll has been surging again in Italy. What's the general picture looking like there?
Yeah, absolutely staggering in Italy. The death toll in the past 24 hours has gone up to 475 deaths in a single day, bringing the total now to way over, approaching 3,000. Of course, what we're seeing in terms of numbers is a daily average death toll that's about 3 times the number of what we saw in Wuhan at the height of its crisis there. Then about 150 deaths a day. Now we're looking at way over 400 deaths a day in Italy. This is despite nationwide lockdowns in Lombardy, where restrictions were very, very tight. A few days after that, the entire nation, including all 60 million people, were affected by lockdowns. Shops are closed. The only stores that are allowed to open are food stores and pharmacies. But, however, we do know that people are still going out to work. Not all businesses are closed. And one of the key recommendations from the head of the Chinese Red Cross, who's been over in Italy giving advice, is that realistically, if you want to have this under control, all economic activity has to stop. But enforcing that is going to be a challenge.
Certainly will. And meanwhile, across Europe, the impact of the virus is being felt, particularly among some of the more famous faces.
Yeah, that's right. Prince Albert of Monaco, only 24 hours after appearing on national television to warn people how serious the virus is, has now confirmed that he is suffering from coronavirus. Also, Michel Barnier, one of the most important diplomats in the European Union, a key Brexit negotiator, now also saying that he has the virus. Of course, it raises the big question of what's going to happen to Brexit negotiations. That story has now paled in significance to what's going on globally. But there are, of course, deep concerns that because Barnier is suffering from the virus, that maybe there is a cluster of potential cases around the crucial European Union Council and Commission buildings in Brussels.
OK, well, speaking of Brexit, that leads us, of course, to the UK. And the UK has taken a much less stringent approach than some of its European counterparts. Are there any signs that the British government are going to impose a stricter lockdown?
Well, the British Prime Minister has, on a near daily basis, been providing information about what the scientists are saying. And what they plan to do is basically incrementally introduce measures on a regular basis and introduce those measures when they see them as being most effective. But the British government only a few days ago was saying that the peak of the virus was going to be in 13 or 14 weeks' time. Now they're telling us that it's on our doorstep here in the UK pretty much imminently. Still, the advice are only recommendations from the government. So don't go to bars, restaurants, cafes. Most people are already working from home. That's been readily adopted by an awful lot of people. But if you step outside the Shard where we are, there are thousands of people at a market close to where I am. New tarmac is being laid on London Bridge. Building sites are still full of workers there. Life in many ways goes on. Nothing like the enforcement that we're seeing in Paris, only across the English Channel. OK, well, we will, of course, be waiting to hear what the UK government has to say in their daily update. But for now, Niamh Barker, thank you.
Well, while the global struggle to contain coronavirus continues, there's a glimmer of good news from where it was first discovered in China. They reported no new local cases on Wednesday, the first time since the virus began in December. But as Scott Heidler reports from Hong Kong, numbers are still growing in other parts of the region.
While countries across the globe continue to seal borders and lock down citizens, the country that saw COVID-19's primary infection for the first time reported no new local cases. In China, the only new coronavirus patients were imported from abroad. As construction and manufacturing resumes after months of shutdown, the epicenter for the virus, Wuhan City and the surrounding Hubei province, reported no new cases also for the first time.
We are delighted to see this 0.00 increase. This means today we have seen the dawn after so many days of hard effort.
There's been an uptick of infections in South Korea, this after a small cluster was discovered at a nursing home. To help offset the economic impact of the coronavirus, the government announced a support package to help small businesses. With two previous packages, the total financial aid now tops $39 billion.
We should think about ways to support those who have suffered from income loss or lost their jobs due to the coronavirus.
The Asian stock markets continue to struggle as concerns over economic disruption from the virus continues. South Korea's Kospi led most of the region's major markets in losses. Thailand announced its biggest single-day jump in coronavirus cases, at least 60. Some of them were people returning from a mass gathering of Muslim missionaries in neighboring Malaysia. Thailand has closed some of its border crossings with its southern neighbor. One of Japan's biggest tourist draws is cherry blossom season, now in full swing. But because of fear over spreading the virus, viewing parties and picnics are discouraged and events have been canceled. The Japanese government just announced that tourist numbers for last month were down over 58%. That's the biggest drop in 9 years since the tsunami and earthquake in 2011 that triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera.
Well, the US markets have opened down again, but have since edged up a few points. This follows another round of emergency plans from governments around the world. Let's cross now to Kristen Salumi, who's following the economic news in New York. Kristen, economic measures being introduced left, right and centre, but the market's still incredibly volatile. What can we read into this market movement and where do we stand?
Yeah, the markets remain very volatile and mostly in positive territory today, although just in the last few minutes, the indices are dipping down into the red again, the Dow and the S&P 500 down a little bit less than a point. As you say, governments and central banks around the world are taking lots of measures to try to contain the fallout from the virus and calm investors. And investors seem to be weighing that minute by minute. In the last 24 hours, we've had an aid package passed in the United States. We've had the European Central Bank rolling out an asset purchase program, the Federal Reserve here in the United States taking more action as well. But we've also had more troubling news. Unemployment claims in the United States hit a 2-year high last week. That information came out today with 70,000 new unemployment benefit claims being filed. And many believe that's just the tip of the iceberg because we've only just begun hearing about layoffs resulting from closures as a result of efforts to mitigate coronavirus, restaurants closing, malls closing, theme parks closing, and so on. So a lot of uncertainty, a lot of volatility. And, you know, as things go up or down a little bit today, I think we're going to see more extremes going forward. In fact, in the last 9 trading sessions, the markets had wild swings, positive and negative, of more than 4% day after day. So at this point, it looks like that trend is continuing.
And Kristen, we've also been hearing that the stock exchange may close next week. That's a significant move, is it not?
Yes, in fact, it is going to close the stock exchange floor. It announced that. That will happen starting on Monday. Trading will continue, however, and that's an important distinction. The markets will remain open, and the leaders of the stock exchange and the president's Treasury Secretary have said it's very important for markets to remain open actually at this time so people can have access to their money. But this week, the New York Stock Exchange began testing people as they came into the stock exchange. They found 2 people tested positive, and so they're doing a deep cleaning of the market, and they're going to do all trading online starting Monday. So coronavirus fallout continues.
It certainly does. Kristen Salumi there joining us live from New York. Thanks very much for bringing us up to speed. Now, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has ordered the country's 1.3 billion population to follow a one-day curfew on Sunday to combat the pandemic. The curfew will be enforced from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. as a test of the nation's ability to go effectively into lockdown. India has also announced a ban on incoming international flights for a week beginning on Sunday. Last week, the country banned most foreigners from entering. That's scheduled to last until at least April 15th.
The coronavirus crisis is very hard to control. There are many big countries that are suffering, so anyone who thinks it won't affect India is wrong.
A quick reminder of the top stories making the news here on Al Jazeera. Italy's death toll from coronavirus is poised to overtake China as the spread of the disease moves towards Europe and the United States. Nearly 3,000 people in Italy have died from the disease, while China's death toll stands at more than 3,200. Spain's numbers are rising rapidly too, more than 100 dead in the past day, while Iran's health minister said on average one person there dies from the virus every 10 minutes. US President Donald Trump says he has called on the US Food and Drug Administration to streamline its processes to speed up the development of therapies aimed at treating the coronavirus. He also said one drug used mainly for malaria has been approved by the FDA to be rolled out soon.
This has been used in different forms, very powerful drug in different forms. And it's shown very encouraging, very, very encouraging early results. And we're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately.
Well, while the global struggle to contain coronavirus continues, there's a glimmer of good news from where it was first discovered in China. They reported no new local cases on Wednesday, the first time since the virus was discovered in December in Hubei province. As the coronavirus pandemic sweeps through the world's populations, aid agencies are warning that refugees are increasingly vulnerable. The United Nations Refugee Agency and Doctors Without Borders say they're struggling to protect people in overcrowded and ill-equipped camps. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has ordered the country's 1.3 billion population to follow a one-day curfew on Sunday to combat the pandemic. The curfew will be enforced from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. as a test of the nation's ability to go effectively into lockdown. India has also announced a ban on incoming international flights for a week, beginning on Sunday. It's barred entry to the country to most foreigners last week. Well, stay with us on Al Jazeera. Women Make Science is up next.
Это была деревушка такая маленькая. Люди фермерством заняты, спокойная жизнь такая, изолированная, да, немного, получается, есть мечты. Раньше я представляла себя на борту МКС, и лишь мысль о том, что я просто смотрю с борта МКС, там типа окошко маленькое есть, на землю, это просто мысль очень так захватывала. Мне нравится то, что это что-то неземное, да? Когда у нас спутник будет на орбите, мое сердце тоже бьется очень сильно, я очень взволнована, очень радостна. И вот типа будто бы гору перевернула, что-то вроде этого. Вот.
I actually have been following your project for a while. Basically, what we want to provide you is a roadmap including information design and licensing, launch itself. I'm really looking forward to learn what stage you are at the moment.
Our team consists of 8 people that works with the satellite. We have dropped out for universities to attend this project. The whole last year we were just trying to learn more about CubeSats in general. So we were thinking about deploying from ISS because we heard that it will be more reliable, and also they provide the actual footage of launching the satellite from the deployer. So it would be very useful for us to have this kind of footage because we want to show our people from our country because it will be the first satellite. Yeah.
Good. When are you aiming to launch?
So in the very beginning we were thinking that we'll be launching this year, but then we realized that we are not ready at all. But so now we are hoping to launch it maybe in 2021. But we need to fundraise more to purchase the flight model and then to buy the launch. No one was doing this kind of projects in our country before, so we need to learn everything by the scratch.
Like basically learning by doing.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
When I joined this project last summer, I was told that building nanosatellites will be easy, cheap, and it can be done fast. And it appeared it's not true.
This is a view of our CubeSat model.
Thank God there is YouTube, Google, and lots of open source to learn. Even in my childhood, I never thought about building space-related things. I knew that there is no opportunities to work in Kyrgyzstan with that knowledge.
We have this DC power converter to supply power to the microcontroller as well as the...
We're thinking about just to collect the data about surroundings of the CubeSat, like temperature, magnetic field. But we are doing it because we want to make our country to develop. I think most people will understand that it's just the first step for a greater future. We passed the halfway, and I think it's the most fun part and most difficult part is coming.
Здесь, мы питаем основные элементы цепи, земля, 5 вольт, 3,3 вольта, еще 5 вольт. У меня в детстве особо друзей не было. И я постоянно в компьютере играла. Я просто лазила в этих папках, удаляла что-то. Такая, ой, какое-то странное название файла, удалить. Мелочи я уже сама узнавала. Он не будет потом брать информацию, светодиод не будет брать информацию. Да. Вот. Я подала заявку, то есть я хотела участвовать